BBC News before we started. And NASA now is announcing what we were being teaching in the last 60 years was completely wrong. They believe that it wasn't violent reaction between the particles that brought the Earth together. It was just a smooth reaction. And they said we have to change the astronomy books in the last 60 years. I was listening with interest, obviously, of this, because that shows all of us that what they are proposing is assumptions. It is not practical science. It is just what they think had happened in the past, but it doesn't prove anything at all. So that was very interesting. I'll probably record this bit from the BBC and put it sometime to you. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, please. That's very interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, so it just shows us that all what we are listening to is just assumptions. And that's what we need people to understand. This is not practical science. This is not operational science. This is assumptions. This is historical science. So I think that's very important. And in our studies, we studied what is science, and that's a very important lecture. I like you to go back and listen to it again. There are two types of science: operational science, which we can repeat in the laboratory. We have no problem with that. We have a major problem with the historical science. In historical science, it speaks about events that happened in the past that we cannot repeat in the present. And it depends on the starting point. So there is materialistic starting point, which says that matter is everything, and time and chance and laws of nature. That cannot explain life, as we discussed that in detail. But we have another starting point, which is in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Beginning is the time. God is the source of energy and power. Heaven and earth is space and matter. So that's more logical and more scientific than in the beginning there was nothing and nothing had exploded. So quick review, really. We have covered what is science. We covered the origin of man, and we spoke about the intermediates and Lucy, which is Australopithecus afarensis. I like you really to go back and listen to these lectures, because we are hoping by April we'll finish the course altogether. And all these elements are really, really important. So if you have time, just go back to the website and study these subjects again. And we discussed Darwin and the Darwinian evolution, the biology. And we discussed his history and the two elements that his theory depends upon, which is natural selection and mutation. And we discovered that natural selection is not a creative power, it is a distributing power. And we discussed that mutation is jump backwards, not forwards. It's a copying mistake. We covered also the astronomical, which is the Big Bang, and that was our discussion last week. So the evolution has three dimensions, as you can see on the screen now: biological, geological, and that's what we're going to discuss tonight. We're going to speak about fossilization, and on Saturday, we'll talk about Noah's Ark in detail. And then we have the cosmological, and that's the Big Bang, and we discussed that last week. So what we're going today is to talk about fossilization. That's the only thing that we will cover tonight. And then we'll talk in detail of Noah's flood on Saturday at 4 o'clock in your time. So this is what we see really. This is the geological column. And in geological column that you see in the textbooks, you find these diagrams of creatures in different layers. There is nothing in the world that shows that actually. This is the assumptions. This is what they gathered from different parts of the world. to put them in this diagrammatic thing. And they have given them millions and millions of years, as you can see here on the screen. By the way, the geological column came in the 17th century, and there was no use of the radiometric dating like carbon-14 and potassium argon and all of that. So these assumptions were done, and all these layers were given this time range without really experiments. It is what they think that had happened. But we have a different understanding of the geological column. We believe that most of these deposits of fossils, and that will define what is fossil in a minute, all these fossils will form mainly in the Noah's flood. Obviously, there is a pre-flood deposits, and that is pre-flood fossilization. And then there is a small part post-flood deposits. So we believe that most of the fossils were formed during the flood year. And most of the mountains were formed during that flood year as well. And that's completely different from what the natural geologists believe. Because as we discussed last week, you remember the picture of the continents. There were only one continent, and then it was divided, they think divided gradually over millions of years. We believe, and that's called uniformitarian. And uniformitarian means the same rate of change happened over millions of years. بالعربي اسمها الوتيرة الواحدة, the same change over millions of years. We believe in catastrophic geology. Catastrophic geology means that Noah's flood caused the destruction of the crust of the earth and formed the continents, and now they are moving very slowly from each other. So that's a very important thing really in understanding creation and understanding the layers of the earth. Now, let us come to a very important question. What is a fossil? I need an answer from you before I continue. What do you think, what do we mean by the word fossil? Any answers? I'm waiting.
Well, I don't know, but I guess it's like bones that of different animals that like throughout many like millions of years have they have like all kinds of minerals that got deposited on them that keep the shape.
Yes.
Like the original shape, and then they are like they are like they can stay the way they are for a long period of time, so they don't decay or anything.
Right, that's very good, Linda. Actually, you mentioned lots of things together, and we'll just refine that in a minute. Right. Any other views about what is a fossil? What do we mean by the...
It's the same as what Linda said, but maybe sometimes we find like the remaining of animals with their own, like having kept their own flesh and like full body. Sometimes they find some fossils.
Right. Yeah. This is mummification, if you like to keep the flesh, but we will explain all of that in a minute. Yes, that's fine. That's okay. So that's fine. Any other definition of fossil? Right. How long do you think that needed to form a fossil? Can it happen rapidly, or it needs millions of years? What do you think?
What will we hear is it takes millions of years. That's what we usually hear on, you know, the media.
Exactly. I know. That's what we learn. That's very good. I'm glad that we have all this information, because some of it right and some of it wrong, and that's good to discuss. Now, fossilization meaning mineralization of mainly bones, but soft tissues as well can be fossilized. But let us talk about bones essentially. And that means that all the minerals, that's calcium and magnesium and other minerals, will enter into this bone and keep the same bone that died long time ago. It kept it fossilized. Fossilized meaning اتحجرت, يعني becoming solid, okay? So it doesn't decay. That's absolutely right. Now, let me just give you an understanding of fossil. If a fish dies in the sea, what will happen? If we leave it millions of years, is it going to be fossilized? No. What will happen is it will float, and then it will decay, and then it will be eaten. When is this fossil is going to, this fish is going to be fossilized? If there is many minerals and pressure and temperature, very high temperature, allowing these minerals to come into the bones, so it keeps this fish as a fossil. So fossilization, meaning mineralization of the bones. It can happen to the soft tissues, but leave the soft tissues a bit now. But it is a quick procedure. It doesn't take millions of years. The Japanese did an experiment. They took a bone of an animal who died recently and put it in a concentrated solution of minerals, and under pressure and under high temperature, this bone fossilized within weeks. So it doesn't depend on millions of years, it depends on the conditions that this animal finds after they die. The other thing about fossilization, it needs to be buried quickly. So this is a living animal who died and buried quickly. It has to be separated from oxygen completely, because if you allow oxygen to come in, it will decay. So it has to be either buried in mud or in ice, like the mammoths in the North Pole. These are animals who lived in very cold atmosphere. And when they died, they were buried in layers of snow. That means they were separated from oxygen, and they can keep their bones and the flesh as well. So fossilization, in order for fossilization to happen, it happens to a dead animal or plant. It has to be buried quickly, because if you leave it for a long time, it will decay. So it has to be buried quickly, and it has to have the right conditions to be fossilized. So that needs lots of minerals and lots of temperature and lots of pressure. And these are the conditions of Noah's flood, really. But we'll talk about the flood on Saturday in detail. Okay? So are we happy about this definition? We'll go through that again. Do we understand fossilization now? I need an answer. Yes, no?
Yes, I do.
Okay. What is the difference between the first definition that we heard initially? The difference is all what we learn is it takes millions of years to happen. What we are learning now, it needs burial, rapid burial, and it needs lots of minerals, and it needs high temperature and pressure. All right? So this is big change in our way of thinking now. I mentioned the word uniformitarian. Uniformitarian believe that nature is all what exists, right? And number two, everything can and indeed must be explained by three things: time, chance, and laws of nature. Number three, they believe that all geological changes have always been operating in the past at the same rate and frequency and power as today. So they refuse all the catastrophes. They refuse the idea of Noah's flood completely. Okay? And that is the big difference between the catastrophic geology and uniformitarian geology. Right. When we find the fossil, when we dig in the layers of the mountains, by the way, the fossils are in the sedimentary rocks. because there are mainly two types of rocks. Igneous rocks, which comes from the lava, from the fountains, from the Barakin,
Volcanoes.
Yeah, volcanoes, thank you. From the volcanoes, what happens is the lava come out and it is very soft and very hot. When the lava becomes very solid and fully crystallized, that's when we call it is a mountain. And the age of the mountain is measured between the lava situation, when it is fluid, and when it becomes fully crystallized and solid, okay? And in the volcanic mountains, we don't find really fossils because they cannot live in that very hot temperature. But we find the fossils in the sedimentary rocks. That's rocks that's formed mainly of mud. Right, as you can see on this photo, that when we find a bone, a fossil, it doesn't come with a ticket saying my age is 65 million years old. It doesn't do that. We give her an age. And we give this bone an age depending on the layer it is found in. And when they believe that these layers are millions of years, they say this fossil is millions of years. But when we see the mechanism, how fossilization happens, it is a rapid process. Let us listen to this video together.
I grew up fascinated by dinosaurs, watching movies, collecting models, reading all about them. Dinosaurs were magnificent, were awesome. It was thought that dinosaurs ruled the world billions of years ago. They disappeared from the earth. Everything I believed about the age of the earth, cycles of life and death, the evolution of humankind began dinosaurs. And then I learned that the Bible presented a very different history. Kim here is my colleague, fellow paleontologist. We've been friends since college. Today we study the same fossils, we use the same techniques, but it doesn't mean we agree on what happened. We do interpret our findings. See, fossils come with tags on them, telling us how old they are, where they lived, what they ate, or even how they died. We have to figure that out from the clues that we find. We never have enough clues. So, our starting points usually lead us to different conclusions.
Here's how I see it. I think this dinosaur died over 100 million years ago. It dried out in the sun for a long time. And later, I think the specimen was covered by river sediment, which was caused by a local flood. She's been lying here all this time till we dug her up.
Where Kim sees millions of years, I see evidence of a different history. I believe this animal died in a flood, but it wasn't a local flood. It was a massive flood that covered the earth, Noah's flood, when God judged the world. The carcass was buried suddenly before it could be eaten or decomposed, buried in a layer of sediment that stretches across the entire continent. Since the flood, according to the Bible, was about 4,300 years ago. That's how old I believe this fossil to be. We come to different conclusions, because we're different starting points. They start with the Bible, we call it good. We all have the same facts. We merely interpret the facts differently because of our different starting points.
شفتوا الفيلم كويس ولا ما كانش العرض مظبوط؟
الحقيقة يعني مش أحسن حاجة بصراحة الكواليتي.
الصوت مش حلو قوي مش واضح.
الصوت مش حلو. طيب خليني ألخص الفيلم مرة تانية. أنا هحاول أخلي صديقي اللي بيعمل لي الحاجات دي يحطه لي على سكرين كبيرة عشان تشوفوه. لكن this film says, there are two paleontologists here. Paleontology is the science which deals with the fossils. So one of them doesn't believe the Bible and one believes the Bible. So they found a dinosaur bones in the sedimentary rocks. And now they have to try to figure out and to understand how old this specimen is. So the one who doesn't believe the Bible will say this dinosaur lived millions of years ago and he died and he was dried in the sun. There is a major problem with this assumption, because if you leave it exposed like this, that means it will decay. It will analyze itself. It will not stay contact. Anyway, so he believes that it is dried in the sun, and then there was a local flood, because you need minerals, and minerals comes from the mountains and in the solvent of the water. So he thinks that the water came and covered this specimen and fossilized, and then layers added upon layer, and then we digged and found this fossil. The other paleontologist who believes the Bible says, I see it differently. These animals died in Noah's flood. All the animals outside the ark died. So because they died outside the flood, outside the ark, the layers of the mountains covered them very quickly. And as a result of rapid burial and rapid fossilization, we digged into these layers and found these fossils. And because we know from the Bible that the Noah's flood was about 4,300 years ago, so this specimen is thousands of years, not millions of years. What do you think about this explanation? I need your feedback. Anyone agrees, disagree?
I have a question. So when, like, first of all, does bones decay?
Yes, they do.
Normal?
Yeah, normally they decay. Soft tissues decay and bones decay, but bones decay less than the soft tissues. Okay,
so since these animals were buried during the flood, how we just find bones and not the full body? Like, does the tissues get decayed after burial?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. The
but
soft
there is
tissues,
no oxygen to have.
Yeah. That's right. That's a good question. Yeah. Some of the animals which you find them intact really is usually with ice, with the snow in the poles, like the mammoth. But you don't find really the full soft tissues in the layers of the sedimentary rock. So what happens is the bones are late in their decay. The soft tissues decay very quickly. So and they don't absorb a lot of minerals like the bones, because the bones are mainly calcium, so they absorb calcium more. And as a result, you find mainly bones which are fossilized. So the rapid burial is important, but it doesn't stop all the decay. It stops the decay in the bones, but not in the soft tissues. Well, there is somebody, Magid Mansour. Sorry. Hello? Can you hear me? Soha, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, yeah.
All right, okay, that's fine. Right, so your question is, the soft tissues decay quicker than the bones. That's number one. Number two, the bones absorb more calcium and magnesium quicker than the soft tissues. So in Noah's flood, you find something called the collection of fossils, مقابر الحفريات, which is collection of different animals buried at the same place. They didn't live in the same place, but they were pushed by water to live in one particular area. So you find dinosaurs and birds in the same burial place in South Africa. And the evolutionists believe that dinosaurs became birds, so they didn't live together. But in the fossil collections, you will find both birds and dinosaurs together, right? So the answer to your question is, the soft tissues can fossilize. Yes, it can, and I have examples of that. But it's mainly the bones, and the soft tissues decay quicker than the bones. That's the answer to your question. Right, any other questions? No? Right, okay, let's continue then. Let us see what is Philip Carey, who is a paleontologist, and he doesn't believe the Bible, but he says this: fossilization is a process that can take things from few hours to millions of years. Look at statement: fossilization can take few hours, depending on the conditions that you put the bone in. Okay? So fossilization is a process that can take things from few hours to millions of years. And then he said, the amount of time that it takes for a bone to become completely pre-mineralized is highly variable. That means the time that needed for the bone to have this calcium and magnesium salts in is variable. If the groundwater is heavily laden with minerals in solution, if the groundwater is the water that covers this specimen, is full of lots of minerals, the process can happen rapidly. So this scientist, who doesn't believe the Bible, he doesn't believe in Noah's Ark, say the fossilization depends on the conditions, not on the time. It depends on a lot of minerals and a lot of temperature and pressure, so that will bring the fossils to happen. The process can happen rapidly. Modern bones that fall into mineral springs can become pre-mineralized within matters of weeks. And I told you that the Japanese brought a bone of an animal who died and put it in very highly mineralized water, and under pressure and temperature, it became fossilized within weeks. So the first thing we need to understand and think about, it doesn't take millions of years to form a fossil. That's what we have been taught in the schools and universities and everything. That's what we hear in the media. That's what we read in the newspapers. But according to science, it depends on the conditions, not on the time. Okay? We need to establish that one fact first. So it depends on the heavy laden with minerals and solutions. In these pictures, can you see the picture on this in your screens? Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. This is called Ichthyosaurus, and this animal here is mineralized, and he's giving birth. So giving birth doesn't take millions of years. It is an acute thing. It is a quick procedure. So during this Ichthyosaurus was giving birth, there was a lot of minerals and a lot of pressure and temperature, and caused it to be mineralized like this. This is not a drawing. This is a real fossil. If you look at the lower part here, you find a fish eating fish. I'll show you that in a bigger scale. This is a specimen in the Creation Museum. So fish eating fish doesn't take millions of years. It is an acute thing. It is just a rapid thing. And this fish eating the other fish here, you can see the tail and you can see the tail here. So fish eating another fish, that doesn't take millions of years. But they found themselves in lots of minerals and lots of temperature and pressure, and that's why they were fossilized. And you
Okay, so
can find
Dr.
some.
Nagy,
Yes, Linda.
so that means that the animal or the fish doesn't have to be dead first, then fossilized. It could be alive and then under extreme conditions get fossilized, like on the set, on the spot, right?
Yeah, no, but
No?
the death happened as a result of all these minerals coming all of a sudden. So it stopped the oxygen coming to this animal.
Yeah.
So the result of this, it died. It's not a living animal. So it died because imagine this animal is covered by massive amount of mud. It will kill him. So it will
Okay,
kill
yeah,
him.
I understand. So it was alive, but then it came under all these extreme conditions, and that's how it died.
Yeah.
And then it got fossilized like very quickly.
And there is no long distance between his death and fossilization. That all happened very quickly. That's the idea.
Right.
So it's not fossilized when he's alive, no.
Okay.
That's a good question. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
So, thank you. So from this example, you understand that it is not the millions of years. It is depending on the conditions that the animal find themselves in when they die. Okay? So, if a fish is swimming in the sea and find another fish and eat this fish, this is not going to be fossilized. It will be fossilized if there is big mud, as you can see on the photo here, and that's why this is the conditions of Noah's flood that lasted 371 days. So we believe fossilization scientifically can happen very rapidly. It doesn't take millions of years, because fish eating a fish doesn't take millions of years. It's an acute condition. And that's what you can see on this fossil. I told you I'll show you the fossil. This is the big fish here with this tail, and this is the small fish, and this is the mouth here. And while she was eating this, a big amount of mud, as you can see in the previous picture here, massive amount of minerals and mud came on it completely and fossilized the bones and some of the flesh, but not all of it. Okay? And that is the real fossil here. And we have this fossil in the Creation Museum. So that proves one thing. It proves that it depends on the conditions that the animal finds himself in. It doesn't depend on the length of time. Let us watch the other film and then I'll get your comments again.
Dead organisms usually don't last long. Scavengers and bacteria consume them quickly. Soft tissues rarely last more than days or weeks, and hard parts like bones or shells only a month or two. But the rocks of Earth contain billions and billions of fossils, and in many places, millions of fossils are exquisitely preserved, even soft parts. How could this be? To preserve a body, it needs to be put in a safe place. Extremely cold or dry places would protect them, but most organisms don't live in those conditions. There is another solution: rapid burial. If a body is sealed from oxygen and out of reach of burrowing animals, then it has a good chance of fossilizing intact. Rapid burial is uncommon today, but there's much evidence of massive burials in the past. Not only are many fossils well preserved, they're found amidst very fine sediment layers. Fine layers rarely last in the present because all sorts of animals are digging around in the mud and soil, searching for food. In just a few weeks or months, the original layers are destroyed. But in the fossil record, churned up sediments are rare. If these sediments were laid down rapidly, however, they'd prevent burrowers from doing their job. And there are thousands of feet of such layers in the fossil record all over the world. This suggests that moving water laid down mud and sand rapidly over a wide area, and the process lasted several months. A year-long global flood, as described in the Bible,
is the best explanation we know for the well-preserved fossils and fine layering throughout the rocks of the Earth.
اوكي، الفيلم ده كان واضح ولا برضو الصوت وحش؟ ايه رأيكم؟
الصوت مش واضح قوي.
الصوت مش واضح لكن الصور واضحة؟
يس.
اوكي. الفيلم ده بيوري حاجة مهمة قوي، انه لما بيموت الانيمال امتى يبقى فوسيلايز؟ لو في كمية املاح كتيرة وضغط وحرارة زي ما قلت. لكن لو اتساب كده هتبص تلاقيه انه اتحلل ويتاكل بواسطة كائنات اخرى تانية. حتى في طبقات الارض في حشرات وبكتيريا بتشتغل بتعيش على الحاجات الميتة. So it depends on the dead bodies to eat them. For fossilization to happen, you need to separate from oxygen, you need the rapid burial, and you need the right conditions for fossilization. Right. Let me just tell you about fossilization in general. This is a hat. The hat is not really millions of years old because there was no hats millions of years old. Okay. This hat fell in a mineral in a cave, not cave, بتاع ده mineralized water, and after 50 years it became fossilized. So this is hat, a really a tissue like الهاتس اللي احنا عارفينها, and it became fossilized. That means because it was thrown into a mineral salt water which is saturated with lots of minerals, and under pressure it was found after 50 years as a fossil. In the fossil that we find that 95% of the fossils are invertebrates. That means they don't have a spinal cord, and they are mostly shellfish. They are marine animals. And you find the marine animals on top of the mountains. So if you go to the Grand Canyon, you find that on the top there are marine fossils. How these marine fossils came up to the mountain, it didn't go in an elevator. That means this mountain was covered with fluid, with water, and then the water receded, and these fossils concentrated on the top in the sedimentary layers. So you found that in the Grand Canyon, and you found it again in Himalaya. You found it in lots of places. So that means there was a universal flood that covered all these areas and brought all these marine fossils to be fossilized on top of these mountains. Then you have there are only 5% remaining. This 5%, you'll find it includes plants, trees, and algae, الطفريات. So you find plants which are fossilized as well. And there is less than 1% vertebrates of all kinds. Vertebrates meaning with a vertebral column, with the spine at the back. So this is the distribution of the fossils, right? So that's why we don't find humans with dinosaurs, for example.
Now this one I've heard quite a bit. The fossil record speaks for itself and it proves evolution. Really? Well, first of all, evidence like the fossil record doesn't speak for itself. It's interpreted through a person's worldview, like looking through a lens. We all have the same evidence in the present, the same rock layers, the same fossils, etc. And we interpret this evidence in regard to the past through the lens or worldview we use. An evolutionist will interpret the evidence through the lens of what he's been taught about evolution in millions of years, but a biblical creationist will interpret the same fossils differently through the lens of the Bible. Now, both are looking at the same evidence in the present, but both are interpreting it very differently. So looking at the fossil record in the present, because that's all we have, and interpreting it through the lens of God's word, we find that what we actually observe in the present confirms the interpretation obtained by looking through the lens of the Bible. Now, the only meaningful place to start is with the word of someone who has seen everything from the beginning and told us exactly what happened. That someone is God, who has given us a written account of the world's true history in the Bible. Genesis 1:1 says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Now, God's written word tells us that during creation week, God created different kinds of animals and plants according to their kinds. The implication is that they will produce after their kind. That's exactly what we see today, isn't it? An elephant produces an elephant, a dog produces a dog, and on and on. Now, on the sixth day, man and woman, Adam and Eve, were also created, and God declared everything very good. It was complete and perfect, and there was no death because there was no sin. Later on in Genesis chapter 3, it is revealed that the man and woman, being tempted by the serpent, rebelled against God, broke his command, and sin and corruption entered the world. In fact, the entire creation was altered and is no longer in its originally perfect, very good state. People and animals began to die. But could gradual death in such a short period of time account for the fossil record we observe today? Not only that, to form a fossil, the animal or plant has to be covered quickly. And since we find billions of fossils all over the world today, something that could have killed billions of things rather quickly had to have occurred. Not to mention, we also find many fish and other marine fossils at the tops of today's mountains. So, what in the Bible could account for that? What could cause billions of dead things to be buried in rock layers rapidly laid down by water all over the earth? Well, flip to Genesis chapter 6 through 9 and you'll read the account of the global flood in Noah's day. Essentially what happened is that men were so corrupt and violent that God selected a righteous man, Noah, and his family to build a huge ark and get in it along with a pair of each land animal kind. And then God caused a worldwide flood. The water gushed up from the ground and water fell from the sky. The earth was totally covered with water, and all land-dwelling, air-breathing creatures outside the ark were killed, all of them. It was a massive and destructive event. After more than a year, the waters had subsided enough that Noah and his family and the animals could get off the ark. Now, what would a worldwide flood do to the earth? Well, far too many things to discuss here, but it would have definitely totally changed the earth's terrain. It would have tossed things all around, and it would have destroyed billions of plants and animals, burying them all over the earth. So based on the biblical worldview, we know that God created everything and it was perfect. But because of man's rebellion, people became corrupt and all kinds of things began to suffer and die. Because of man's continual violence and corruption, God destroyed all people and all other land-dwelling, air-breathing creatures in the world, save Noah, his family, and representatives of all land-dwelling, air-breathing animal kinds, with a global, catastrophic deluge. The fossil record that we observe today makes perfect sense within the biblical worldview. Now I could go on, but enough said.
Right. الصوت كان واضح المرة دي ولا برضو مش كويس؟
لا كان كويس actually بالنسبة لي أنا سمعته معقول كان حلو.
سمعتي معقول. طب كويس أوي. Right. شفتوا الفكرة برضو تاني بنكررها in the flood can explain the burial of different animals in different layers because of the high mineral level and the temperature and pressure that allowed these creatures to die and buried rapidly and then kept as fossils. And as you can see, on top of the mountains, we find some marine fossils. And these marine fossils means that this mountain was covered with water at some stage, and then the water receded to the back, and in the sedimentary layers of the mountain, these fossils were deposited. So all what we need to understand in this lecture today is fossilization does not necessarily need millions of years. It needs a rapid burial. It needs the right conditions. That means mineralization, lots of minerals under pressure and temperature, and these are the conditions of the flood. Let me just take you quickly before we finish about Charles Darwin. He said, geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain. He thinks that we all came from common ancestor and we all developed gradually. So if that really happened, that means we find lots of intermediates. Intermediates means creatures which will have some characteristics of the lower animal and some characteristics of the higher animal. So if a dinosaur wants to form a wing, so we need to find a specimen with a dinosaur and some small wings, and these wings will increase till and his body will come less and less, so he can fly. So he's saying in the geology at his time, more than 200 years ago, does not reveal such fine gradual organic chain. And this is perhaps, he says, is the most obvious and gravest objection which can be urged against my theory. He says that if we don't find the intermediates, that means the theory is not right. The explanation lies, as I believe, in the extreme imperfection of geological record. He said that according to his time, 200 years ago now or more, the geological findings were limited. So he said, when we discovered more geology and more geology and more geology, we'll find these intermediate creatures. Intermediate creatures means a creature which will have some characteristics of the lower animal and some characteristics of the higher animal. So let us see what the modern geology says. But just in proportion as this process of examination has acted on an enormous scale, so must the number of intermediate varieties which have formerly existed on the earth be truly enormous. He's saying, really, if we are going to do more research, we'll find that there is enormous number of intermediates between the creatures. So that means we all came from common ancestor. Why then it is not every geological formation and every stratum full of such intermediate links? He's asking why we don't find them. And then let us see what the new scientist, Stephen Stanley, and he is new evolution time scale, he is an evolutionist, but he says, in fact, the fossil record does not convincingly document a single transition from one species to another. So this is a person who doesn't believe the Bible, but he says the fossil record does not show at all one creature changing into another after 200 years from Darwin. Mark Ridley, a zoologist in Oxford, he said the gradual change of fossil species has never been part of evidence for evolution. He says the evolutionist cannot say, oh, we found intermediates between creatures, and that means evolution theory is true. In the chapters on the fossil record in Origin of Species, Darwin showed that the record was useless for testing between evolution and special creation because it has great gaps in them. So that means in the geology, we don't find intermediate creatures between the simple and the complex creatures that is needed to prove the evolution. Mark Ridley continues to say the same argument still applies. No real evolutionist, whether gradualist or punctuating, I'll explain these two words. Gradualist meaning moving from one simple to complex gradually. Punctuate equilibrium is a new term, which is the animals stayed like simple for a long time, and then all of a sudden it became the next stage, and then stayed in the next stage for millions of years, and all of a sudden jumped to become higher. This is, again, there is no evidence of that. Uses of fossil record as evidence in favor of theory of evolution is opposed to special creation. I'll show you some examples. This is called dragonfly. They think it is 200 million years old. It is very similar to the dragonflies that's flying nowadays. So if it is very similar in the fossil record to what we have nowadays, that means what happened during the 200 million years? There is no change, right? Because according to evolution, change happened gradually over a million of years. But we have a fossil which is dated as 200 million years old. We don't agree about that, but they believe it is 200 million years old. It's very similar to what we have now. We have another animal like this, yeah? They think it is 15 to 20 million years ago. It was found alive, similar specimen in 2006. So what happened during these 15 to 20 million years? This is a plant which is Wallaby Pine, which is very important because they discovered that in 1994. They believed it was distinct 150 million years ago. but they found that in Australia, and it is not extinct or anything at all. It is the same plant here, like the one in the fossils. So that means it is an rapid and it is not extinct at all. This is a coelacanth, which is an important animal again. It is a fish. And they think it was extinct 65 million years ago with the dinosaurs. And they found this fish near Madagascar and in Japan. And you can have a coelacanth fish to eat nowadays if you go to a restaurant. So they think it was extinct with dinosaurs, but it's actually still in the water nowadays. And there is no change between what we find nowadays and the specimen that we find in the fossil record. This is really very important. So I'll finish with this for the lecture today. There are two things. One is abrupt appearances of animals in the fossil record, and the other one is stasis. Let me explain these two different words. That means when they dig in the layers, this is the diagram, it's not a proper thing. When they dig in the layers, they found abrupt appearance of animals. They found frogs appearing. They found horses appearing. They found this type of plants appearing, yeah? And there is no precursor. There is no a pre-model of any of these. They just appear complete. And the other thing is stasis. Stasis meaning they stay the same as we have them today, right? So they are stable. So as I showed you previously, all these animals, the coelacanth, they are, and the Wallaby Pine, and all of this, they prove that they haven't changed. So what happened in 65 million years? There must be changes according to evolution, but they are exactly the same. The same as we find them in the fossil, and the same as we find them alive today. Okay, so today really the lecture is about fossilization, and what we understand by that is it doesn't need millions of years. It depends on the condition that the animals find itself in after they die and buried quickly. They can be buried in the mud, and that is the sedimentary rock, or it can be buried in the ice, and that is the situation in the full animals that, like the mammoths that we find in the North Pole. So that's really our gun, but this is the main lesson for today. And on Saturday at 4 o'clock your time, we will discuss Noah's flood in detail and Noah's Ark, because we need a massive geological change that allows for these things to happen. Any questions before I finish?
Yes, quick question. Did they find human fossils?
Yeah, there are human bones, yes. And they date it to thousands of years. They don't date it to millions of years, because they believe that humans came from common ancestor. And this common ancestor, they believe about 4 million years ago. And then we became humans about 70,000 years or 120,000 years, depending on which theory you are following. So they believe the humans on Earth is about 120,000 years. But recently they found a skull in Morocco, and they say it is 300,000 years. So they keep just keeping numbers and numbers, but there is no evidence of any of that. Because the fossil doesn't come. Yeah.
كنت اسال هم how they originally بيدوا عشان بيدوا الديت بتاعت كل حاجه، يعني في 65 million years ليه مش 36 million years؟ ليه مش 97 million years؟
Yes.
Based on what؟ يعني
I know, I agree with you completely. All this is estimates. What happened is they find this fossil in a layer and they give this layer a date, right?
Okay.
And this date is not based on science. It is based on the geological column that was given in the 17th century without the radiometric dating. So because they found this fossil in such a layer, so they said this animal belongs to this layer, and this layer is 65 million years ago, so this animal must be 65 million years ago. But what we found, as you can see in the coelacanths, which is a very important example, you find that the fossil that they dated as 65 million years is exactly like the fish that is still in the water now, which discovered in 1938. So what happened during these 65 million years? There is no change. That's called stasis. So that is really, we are changing all our understanding, ya Osama, because this is a completely different from what we studied all our years.
Yes. So another question. The fossils they found on the top of mountain.
Yeah.
What scientist says? Yeah, it come from what? As it's a question. Another one we have as a medical field, we say in differential diagnosis. So it's maybe come from many reasons, and why they always insist to reject the Bible account or flood account.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Let us tackle the first one. They say it is a local flood in this mountain.
Okay.
So for marine fossils to be on the top of the mountain, that needs a water to cover this mountain. So they said it was a local flood. But you find that in America, in Arizona, you find in the Grand Canyon, you find that in the top of the mountains there are marine fossils. You find that in Himalaya in India. You find it in different places. So they say local, 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 local. We say no, there is a universal flood in Noah's flood, which they reject.
They admit with flood.
Oh yeah, it has to be flood.
Okay.
But they think it's a local flood. It's a local event. They don't accept the biblical account.
Okay.
But they have to accept it's a flood. Yeah, they do.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah. Can I ask about the layers of the Earth? Like.
Yeah.
Just an explanation. How do they?
I'll explain that in detail on Saturday, but I'll give you a quick answer. During the flood, what happened? The fountains of the deep were opened, and the crust of the earth was broken, and lots of mud moved from one place to another. And depending on the speed of water and the size of the particles, these layers were deposited very quickly. And I'll give you the evidence on Saturday.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Right, any other questions? Right. On Saturday, we'll meet at 4 o'clock your time.